So if you haven't figured it out yet, that's the spot where the new 100-gallon coral reef tank's gonna go. And just a little bit ago, you saw the new 100-gallon coral reef tank stand and canopy. Now, the happy homeowner's gonna help me move it up against that wall, and we're going to set up a 100-gallon coral reef tank. And even though you didn't see them, that was the homeowner's little dogs that you heard. They greeted us as we came in the door. Anyhow, it's a 100-gallon acrylic coral reef tank. It has a colored black back on it and two large openings on top of the tank. You can see located there in the center, in the middle, and the back is a trapezoidal shaped internal overflow with two sets of return lines coming back into the tank. Each set is split with a Y, so there are actually 4 outlets. And this is the dry version looking down inside that internal overflow. And then if we take a look below down in the cabinet, you can see here the underside of the cabinet's top is cut out to accommodate the single drain line and the 2 return lines. This system will also be using a Euro-style open sump. So this is simply an acrylic reservoir that sits below the tank, and you can see here the homeowner's choice of the protein skimmer as well as a calcium reactor. So this tank brand being a choice of the homeowners and a brand I'm not particularly familiar with, I'm going to flip the tank on its back so I can get a better idea as to how exactly the plumbing is to pass through this internal overflow. And so we'll go ahead and pull out all the parts that they've sent. There's one item in particular, looks like a version of a Durzo standpipe. The idea being that it will muffle the slurping noise as a result of a standpipe inside that internal overflow. And here is the holes cut, in particular the drain line in the bottom of the internal overflow, and alongside of it are the 2 return lines. And here's the tubing for that return line system. So I'm going to take these bulkheads and thread those hose barb adapters into them. So there are 2 choices for applying threads to threads, and that's using Teflon tape or a plumber's compound. Since I'm not familiar well enough with a plumber's compound, I will use Teflon tape. The interesting thing about Teflon tape is you have to thread it on in the same direction that you're threading it into. Otherwise, as you thread it on, it unthreads itself. Secondly, and I don't know if many people know this, there are 2 sides to Teflon tape. I'm not sure what the difference is, but there are in fact 2 different textures or sides to Teflon tape. So as we get the Teflon tape threaded onto the ends of these hose barb fittings and get them threaded, we're ready to put them in through the bottom of the tank. And here I'm going to take that 3/4 inch bulkhead. There are 2 of them. They'll be the return lines coming back up into the tank via the internal overflow. I'm now going to take and thread on the nut at the end of it. There's a gasket on the inside that will cushion the flange edge of the bulkhead, and as I tighten the nut, that will compress that gasket, creating a seal through those passages. And here's our big boy. This is the 1.5 inch diameter bulkhead. This will serve as the drain line out of the internal overflow. So once we've got it positioned through the larger hole in the bottom of the overflow, we can go to the underside and tighten the nut onto its threaded shaft as well. We're going to hold it in place, tighten it down, and again, hand tighten at the moment is just fine. And of course, as you saw earlier, I had threaded those hose barb adapters into the other end of the bulkheads, and now I'm cutting the length of tubing that's going to connect those hose barb adapters to the elbowed adapters at the top of the overflow. Again, this is all part of the return line system that brings the water from down below up to the top of the internal overflow, and in turn is discharged out into the aquarium. So I'm now slipping the end of the hose onto that elbowed hose barb adapter, and I'm now connecting the second one. You can clearly see here how the two of them pass from the bulkheads at the bottom of the overflow to the elbowed barbed adapters just on the discharge side. And now that we've got the return lines and drain bulkheads already secured in the bottom of the tank, we do want to take and tighten up those bulkheads. We can use the channel lock pliers to tighten the smaller 3/4 inch bulkheads, and we want to tighten them slightly more than snug. We have to be careful though that we don't over tighten them. Now the larger bulkhead, the big 1.5 inch, my channel lock pliers won't fit. So that's going to take a little bit different approach. We're going to take my straight edge screwdriver and with a hammer ever so gently tighten or tap to tighten the nut over the large bulkhead. And with all the bulkheads through the bottom of the tank secured, we can now flip the tank right side up and place it on top of the stand. We've now got to the point where we can find out how this cap arrangement works on the standpipe in the drain side of the internal overflow. It apparently slips over the top of that standpipe, and as I said, it appears as though it's a muffling device that has a kind of a similar siphon, anti-siphon arrangement as does the Durzo standpipe. I guess we'll find out shortly once we fill the tank with water. So with the plumbing portion in the tank side completed, we can now start working on the filter system inside the cabinet. First thing I want to do is pop the doors off the cabinet so I've got some access into the cabinet itself. Once again, here's the area where the drain line and return lines will pass through from the cabinet back up to the tank. What we want to do now is pull this assortment of equipment out of the cabinet so that we can get an idea as to where we want to place things. So we've turned things around in the system. I think it'll end up working out better with the sump at the right hand side. That way the water pump is right next to where the power supply is, and this also happens to be where the pump will send its water to the refrigeration unit over on this side of the aquarium stand. So now it's time to assemble the water pump and the drain system into the tank. And as we assemble that water pump inlet as well as discharge side, we need to take into consideration what I'll call the serviceability or the ease at servicing that water pump. So we want to incorporate not only a ball valve but a union fitting in there as well, so that if we need to, we can shut off the water flow, remove the water pump easily, and still retain water within the filter. And here you can see we have a straight elbow coming off the discharge side of the water pump. But once it's in place, there's a ball valve for closing or shutting off the flow, and there's a union fitting for disconnecting the water pump from that inlet tubing. And over here again is where the refrigeration unit's going to sit. And its discharge will connect to those two bulkheads, which will return to those two return lines. Be sure to come back for part 2 as we hook up the refrigeration unit as well as the drain out of the bottom of the tank into the filter system.